I thought chaos would break the city, tear it apart from the inside and leave space for something new, something I could shape, something I could control. But I was wrong, because the city didn't collapse, it adapted, faster than I expected, faster than I was ready for. Within days, the streets felt different, not quieter, not safer, just tighter, like something invisible was wrapping around everything, pulling it into order that didn't belong here. Raids started first. Not loud, not dramatic, just precise, controlled, efficient. Doors kicked in before sunrise. People dragged out without explanation. Questions asked later in rooms no one ever talked about. And the worst part wasn't the violence. It was how clean it all looked, how organized, like someone had already decided who mattered and who didn't. Then came the inspections. Every business, every corner, every place where money changed hands suddenly had eyes on it. And those eyes didn't blink, didn't negotiate, didn't care who you were or who you knew. Because this wasn't about territory anymore. This was about control. His control. I didn't see him yet, not directly, but I felt him everywhere. In the way people spoke, in the way they stopped speaking, in the way even the bold ones started choosing their words carefully, like they already knew that saying the wrong thing could erase them. This wasn't chaos anymore. This was a system. And systems don't make mistakes. I stood by the window that night, looking down at the street where nothing looked different and everything had changed, and I understood something that should have been obvious from the start. I didn't break the game. I just invited someone else to take it over. And now it wasn't about surviving inside chaos. It was about surviving inside a hunt. And I wasn't watching it from the outside anymore. I was already inside the circle. I saw him for the first time in broad daylight, and that alone told me everything I needed to know, because men like him don't hide unless they have to, and he clearly didn't. He walked into the center of the city like he owned it, not loud, not surrounded by noise or unnecessary force, just a small group behind him, disciplined, quiet, moving exactly when he moved, stopping exactly when he stopped, like they weren't following him but orbiting him. And the moment people noticed, the street shifted, not dramatically, not in panic, just enough, just that slight hesitation in movement, that small adjustment people make when they realize something more dangerous than them has entered the space. He wasn't dressed like a soldier, not exactly, and not like a criminal either, something in between, something that made it hard to place him, but easy to understand, because everything about him said the same thing without a single word being spoken. He didn't belong to this place, and because of that, this place didn't apply to him. I stayed at a distance, far enough not to be seen, close enough to watch, because I needed to understand how he works, not what people say about him, not rumors, not fear, but reality. And reality was simple. He didn't rush. He didn't search randomly. He didn't react. He moved with intention. Every stop he made wasn't chosen in the moment. It was already decided before he stepped into the city. Every door he entered, every person he looked at, every question he asked was part of something larger, something already mapped out. And the more I watched, the more it became clear that he didn't need to know where the shipment was. He just needed to remove every possibility until only one remained. That's how men like him win. Not by finding the truth, by eliminating everything that isn't it. I followed his movement through the city, not directly, never close enough to risk being noticed, but enough to see the pattern, because there is always a pattern, even in perfection. He started with the edges. Small operators, minor routes, places no one important would care about. And that's exactly why he cared, because those places talk, those places connect, those places carry whispers that eventually lead somewhere real. He wasn't looking for the shipment. He was building a map. And every name he collected, every face he marked, every location he entered tightened the circle just a little more. My circle. I felt it before I could prove it. That quiet pressure in the back of your mind. The one that doesn't scream danger but doesn't let you ignore it either. The one that tells you that even if you're not seen yet, you're already being approached. He didn't know it was me. Not yet. But I knew something worse. He was getting closer. Not because I made a mistake, but because I existed. That's the difference. Mistakes can be hidden. Existence cannot. Later that day, one of my men came in without knocking, breathing too fast, trying to speak before his thoughts caught up with him. They asked about the routes, he said, voice tight, controlled, but not enough. Not directly, but they're asking, everywhere. Same questions, same timing. I didn't need more. That confirmed it. He wasn't guessing. He was narrowing. I stood up slowly, walked to the table, and placed my hand on the surface, grounding myself not because I was losing control, but because I needed to think clearly, and clarity requires stillness. He's not searching, I said. My brother looked at me, confused. Then what is he doing? I looked back at him. He's closing the exits. Silence filled the room. Because they understood that. You can outrun a search. You can't outrun a system that removes every path out. I moved to the window again, looking down at the street where everything looked normal to anyone who didn't know what to look for. And I almost respected him in that moment. Not because of what he was doing, but because of how he was doing it. Clean, efficient, inevitable. And that's what made him dangerous. Not his power, not his position, his certainty. He believed in the outcome before it happened. And men like that don't stop. They don't hesitate. They don't doubt. Which means they don't fail. Unless something breaks their system. Unless something forces them to see what they weren't prepared to see. I stepped back from the window. Good, I said quietly. My brother frowned. Good. I nodded. Yes. Because now I knew exactly what kind of enemy I was dealing with. And more importantly, how to make him look in the wrong direction. He wants the truth, I said slowly. I paused. Then we'll give him something that looks exactly like it. And that was the moment the game changed. Not because he made his move, but because I decided how to answer it. I didn't tell them everything. Not my brother, not the men who had followed me since before the war, not even the ones who would die for me without asking why. Because loyalty is useful until it becomes a weakness, and the moment people know too much, they stop being assets and start being risks, and I couldn't afford risks anymore. So I started lying. Not loudly, not obviously, just enough to shift reality in small ways that no one could trace back to a single point. Just enough to make every piece of information incomplete, every answer slightly off, every assumption just wrong enough to matter. The shipment was never in one place to begin with, but now it became something else entirely. I broke it apart. Crate by crate, piece by piece, I moved it through the city like it was nothing more than ordinary cargo, split between locations that had no connection on paper, no obvious pattern, no reason to be linked unless someone already knew exactly what they were looking for. And even then, they would have to be sure, because guessing wrong in this game doesn't cost time, it costs lives. Each part went to a different place. Some to locations we controlled, some to places we didn't. That was the important part. Because control is predictable, and predictable is traceable, but chaos, real chaos, the kind that doesn't look like chaos at all, is invisible until it's too late. I created false routes. Old contacts suddenly became active again, moving things they didn't understand, delivering packages that meant nothing to them, repeating instructions that sounded routine but were designed to mislead anyone listening. Because I knew he was listening, not directly, not with ears, but through patterns, through movement, through disruption. And I gave him exactly that. Disruption. Information that pointed somewhere, but never somewhere real. I watched how my people reacted. That was almost more important than the enemy. They started asking questions. Not openly, not yet, but in the way they looked at me, in the hesitation before they followed orders, in the small pauses that didn't exist before, the kind of pauses that mean a man is thinking instead of obeying. Why are we splitting it like this? One of them asked. I didn't answer directly. Because we don't keep everything in one place. I said, calm, simple, true enough to pass. But we always. Not anymore. That ended it. Not because they agreed. Because they understood that pushing further would only make things worse for them. That's the difference between fear and loyalty. Loyalty asks. Fear obeys. And I needed fear. Not because I wanted it. Because I needed control. Even if it was an illusion. Later that night, I walked through one of the secondary locations, a place no one important would ever look twice at, dark, quiet, forgotten, exactly the kind of place that becomes valuable when no one believes it could be. I opened one of the smaller crates. Inside, the same cold metal, untouched, silent, waiting. I stared at it longer than I needed to, not because I doubted my decision, but because I understood the weight of it now, not just what it was, but what it meant. Because this wasn't just a shipment anymore. It was a signal, a trigger, something that pulled attention toward it whether I wanted it to or not. And I was the one holding it, which meant I was the one being pulled. I closed the crate slowly. For a moment, I considered telling them everything, bringing them into it fully, making them understand the scale, the danger, the reality of what we were dealing with, because part of me knew that if they understood, they might become stronger, sharper, more prepared. But a bigger part of me knew the truth. People don't get stronger when they understand fear. They break. And broken people make mistakes. I couldn't allow that. So I kept lying. I gave them pieces, never the whole. Directions, never the destination. Reasons, never the truth. And in doing so, I realized something that should have bothered me more than it did. I wasn't just hiding the truth from the enemy. I was hiding it from everyone, which meant I was playing against all of them at once. The enemy outside the circle, and the one standing inside it with me. I stepped back into the street, the night air colder than before, the city quieter, heavier, like it was holding its breath waiting for something to happen. And I knew something then with complete certainty. If I survived this, it wouldn't be because I trusted anyone. It would be because I didn't. He chose the place. That was the first thing I understood when the message reached me, not through words, not directly, but through the kind of invitation that doesn't ask, the kind that simply appears and expects you to follow it if you're smart enough to recognize what it means. A quiet office above a closed business, neutral ground, no noise, no witnesses that matter, the kind of location designed not for comfort, but for clarity, because places like that don't hide anything, they expose it. I didn't go alone, but I went in alone. That's the difference. When I stepped inside, he was already there, standing near the window, looking out at the street like he wasn't waiting for me, like I was the one interrupting something that would have continued without me. And that small detail told me more than anything else could. He didn't chase. He positioned. "You took your time," he said without turning. His voice was calm, controlled, not raised, not forced, the kind of voice that doesn't need to prove anything because it already assumes it's being heard. I wanted to make sure it was worth it. I replied, stepping further in, closing the door behind me without breaking eye contact with his reflection in the glass. He turned then, and for the first time, we looked at each other without distance. Up close, he looked exactly how I expected. Not intimidating in the obvious way. No unnecessary aggression. No visible tension. Just precision. Everything about him was measured, from the way he stood to the way he focused on me. Like he wasn't just looking at me. He was assessing, calculating, placing me somewhere inside a structure only he could see. "Do you know why you're here?" he asked. I let a small pause settle before answering. "Because you want to talk," I said. A faint shift in his expression, not quite a smile, not quite approval. "I want to understand," he corrected. I nodded slowly. Same thing. It wasn't. And we both knew it. He moved slightly, not closer, not further, just enough to adjust the angle, to see me better, or maybe to make sure I saw him the way he wanted to be seen. "There's something in this city that doesn't belong here," he said, his tone even, almost neutral, like he was discussing something abstract, not something that was already costing people their lives. "There's always something that doesn't belong," I replied. "Not like this." He held my gaze. "Not something that changes the balance." I didn't react. Not outwardly. "That depends on who's holding it," I said. And there it was. The first real move. Not a question. A test. He let the silence stretch just long enough to make it intentional, just long enough to see if I would fill it, if I would give him more than I intended to. But I didn't, because silence is only dangerous if you don't know how to use it. "You've been moving differently," he said finally. Not accusing. Observing. "Everyone has," I answered. "Not everyone adapts this quickly." I tilted my head slightly. "Some of us don't have a choice." That was true. And not. He stepped closer now, not aggressively, just enough to close the distance between us, to make the conversation more direct, more personal, to remove any remaining space where ambiguity could hide. "If you're involved," he said quietly, "you're making a mistake." I almost smiled. "If I'm not?" I asked. "Then you're standing too close to it." We held that moment. No movement, no shift, just two people measuring each other without saying what mattered most. Because saying it would end the conversation. And neither of us wanted that. Not yet. "People are disappearing," I said, letting the words sit between us without weight, without accusation. "They're being removed," he replied. "From what?" "From the equation." I nodded slowly. "And who decides the equation?" He didn't answer immediately. Then, simply, "I do." There it was. Not arrogance. Certainty. I looked at him for a second longer, then stepped back slightly, not retreating, just resetting the space, breaking the intensity just enough to signal that the conversation was ending, not escalating. "Then you should be careful," I said. His eyes narrowed just slightly. "Why?" "Because if you remove the wrong part." I paused. "You might not like what's left." That was my lie. Or maybe it wasn't. He watched me closely, searching for something, not in my words, but in what I wasn't saying, and I knew he wouldn't find it. Not yet, because I wasn't giving him the truth. Only pieces, just like I was giving everyone else. "You're either very confident," he said quietly, "or very careful." I met his gaze. Same thing. It wasn't. And again, we both knew it. I turned toward the door. He didn't stop me. Didn't need to. "Next time," he said behind me, "we won't talk." I paused with my hand on the handle. "Next time," I replied without turning, "we won't have to." And then I left. Out into the street, into the city that was no longer pretending to be normal, into a game that had just become something else entirely. Because now we had seen each other. Not as rumors. Not as shadows. As players. And from that moment on, nothing either of us did would be accidental. Not anymore. He didn't come for me. That was the first thing I understood after the meeting, and it should have felt like relief, but it didn't, because when a man like him decides not to touch you directly, it means he's already found something better, something closer. It started quietly. One of our runners didn't show up. No warning, no message, just gone. At first it looked like fear, like he ran, like he decided the game wasn't worth it anymore. And for a moment I almost believed that, because people do run when pressure gets too high. But then the second one disappeared. And the third. No pattern in who they were, no obvious connection, no shared route or role that would explain it, which meant one thing. The pattern wasn't in them. It was in him. He wasn't removing threats. He was creating gaps. Gaps in communication, gaps in movement, gaps in trust, small empty spaces that didn't seem important on their own, but together started to break the structure we depended on, because a system doesn't collapse from one hit. It collapses when enough small parts stop working at the same time. "They're taking people," my brother said, his voice tighter than usual, controlled but strained, the way it gets when someone is trying not to show fear. "They're selecting them," I corrected. He frowned. "What's the difference?" I looked at him. Taking is random. Selecting is strategy. He didn't like that answer. Neither did I. Then came the arrests. Not loud, not public, not the kind that send a message to the streets, but quiet removals. People pulled in for questioning and not coming back, or coming back different, slower, quieter, carrying something in their eyes that wasn't there before, something that spreads faster than words. Fear, but not the kind we were used to. Not fear of violence. Fear of being known. "They asked about you," one of them said when he finally returned, sitting across from me, hands shaking just enough to notice if you were looking for it. I was. "What did you tell them?" I asked. "The truth," he said too quickly. I let the silence sit. Then, "Which version?" He swallowed. "That I don't know anything." Another lie. But this one wasn't for me. It was for himself. "They already know more than they should," he added, trying to fill the space, trying to convince me, or maybe convince himself that it wasn't over. I nodded slowly. Of course they did. Because this wasn't about extracting information. It was about watching reactions. He wasn't looking for answers. He was measuring pressure, seeing who breaks, seeing who bends, seeing who starts acting differently when the weight is applied. And the worst part, it was working. I could see it in the way my people moved, the hesitation that wasn't there before, the quiet conversations that stopped when I entered the room, the glances exchanged when they thought I wasn't paying attention. They weren't just afraid of him. They were afraid of what he might already know. And that changes things. Because once people believe the truth is already out there, they start protecting themselves instead of the system. That's when it breaks. "He's getting closer," my brother said that night, standing by the window, looking out at a street that looked exactly the same and felt completely different. I stood behind him. "No," I said quietly. He turned. "No, he's not getting closer." I paused. "He's making us come to him." That realization settled heavier than anything else, because it meant every move we made, every adjustment, every attempt to stay ahead of him, was part of his design, unless we changed the way we played. I walked to the table, placing my hands flat against the surface, grounding myself again, forcing my thoughts into order, because reacting to pressure only makes you predictable, and predictable is exactly what he needed. He wants us to panic, I said slowly. He wants mistakes. And what do? My brother asked. I looked up at him. We don't give him either. He shook his head slightly. That's easy to say. I almost smiled. Yes. I paused. That's why we won't do it. He didn't understand. Not yet. And that was fine. Because this wasn't about strength anymore. It wasn't about control. It wasn't even about survival. It was about perception. If he believes we're breaking, he pushes harder. If he believes we're stable, he adjusts. So we give him something else. Something he can't read. Something that doesn't follow the rules he built his system on. I straightened up. He wants to know how we react under pressure, I said. I let the words settle. Then we stop reacting. My brother stared at me. And then what? I met his eyes. Then we make him react. And in that moment, I understood something clearly. He wasn't hunting me. Not directly. He was shaping the space around me. And if I didn't change that space first, he would close it completely. So I made the decision. Not to fight him. Not yet. But to change the game. In a way he wouldn't see coming. Because for the first time since this started, I stopped thinking like someone being hunted, and started thinking like someone who could hunt back. I stopped reacting. That was the first real move I made. Up until that point, everything I did, even when it looked controlled, was still shaped by him, by the pressure he applied, by the way he tightened the space around me and forced decisions that weren't entirely mine. But now I stepped outside of that pattern, and the moment I did, everything became clearer. He was reading behavior, so I gave him the wrong one. I started by choosing a target. Not random, not emotional. A group that was already unstable, already under suspicion, already close enough to the edges of his map that a small push would send them straight into the center of his attention. And more importantly, a group that didn't know enough to understand what was happening to them until it was already too late. They had history, small operations, questionable alliances, just enough noise in their past to make them believable. And that's what I needed, not innocence, not guilt, just plausibility. I moved pieces slowly. Information first. A whisper here, a hint there, nothing direct, nothing that could be traced back, just enough fragments placed in the right channels so that when someone started connecting them, it would look like they discovered something real, something hidden, something worth acting on. Then movement. Small shipments. Nothing significant on their own, nothing that would raise alarm if seen in isolation, but together they formed a pattern, and patterns are what men like him follow. Patterns are what guide their decisions, because patterns feel like truth. I made sure those movements overlapped with that group's known routes. Not perfectly, just enough. Perfect patterns look fake. Imperfect ones look real. My people didn't understand what I was doing. That was intentional. They followed orders without seeing the structure behind them, which meant if any of them were being watched, questioned, or pressured, they couldn't give away what didn't exist in their minds. They carried pieces of a lie without knowing it was a lie, and that made it stronger. Why are we moving this through them? One of my men asked. Because they won't expect it, I said. That was true, just not in the way he thought. Days passed. Small changes. Subtle shifts. Nothing immediate. That's how you know it's working. Because systems don't react instantly. They adjust. And then, he moved. Not toward me. Toward them. Raids. Questions. Pressure. The same methodical process I had watched before, now focused somewhere else, and I could feel it. That shift in weight. That slight release in the space around me. Like a hand loosening its grip just enough to breathe. He's hitting them hard, my brother said. Watching the reports come in, the rumors spreading, the noise building around a place that used to be irrelevant. I nodded. Good. He looked at me. That's what you wanted? Yes. He hesitated. And what happens when he realizes? I didn't answer immediately, because that was the real question. Not if, when. And the answer wasn't comfortable. It buys us time, I said finally. That's it, he asked. That's everything. Time is the only thing you can't create. You can only take it from someone else. And that's exactly what I had done. For the first time since this started, he was working on something that wasn't me, following a path that led somewhere real, just not where he thought it did. And that's the difference between hiding and misdirecting. Hiding delays the inevitable. Misdirection changes it. But I knew something he didn't. Not yet. The group I had pushed into his line of sight. They wouldn't stay quiet. They would resist. They would react. They would make noise. And noise creates chaos. Not the kind I started. A different kind. Uncontrolled. Unpredictable. And that was dangerous. Because chaos doesn't follow plans. It breaks them. Including mine. That night, I stood alone again, looking out over the city, watching lights flicker in places that shouldn't be active, hearing distant movement where there used to be silence, feeling the shift that happens when too many pieces start moving at once. I had redirected him, for now, but I also created something new, something that didn't belong to either of us. And that meant one thing. The game was no longer just between me and him. It was becoming something bigger, something harder to control. And the worst part, I was the one who started it. I exhaled slowly. "Let's see if you follow the wrong path all the way," I said quietly. Because if he did, I would be ready. And if he didn't, then this was about to get a lot more complicated. He knew. Not everything. Not yet. But enough. I felt it before I saw it. The same way you feel a shift in the air before something breaks. The same quiet pressure that doesn't come from noise or movement, but from awareness, from the realization that someone, somewhere, has just stepped outside the path you built for them. For days, everything moved exactly the way I expected. He hit the group I pointed him toward. Hard, clean, systematic, just like before. Raids, disappearances, pressure, the same pattern repeating itself in a different place. And for a moment it worked, it really worked, because the weight moved away from me. The space opened, the attention shifted, and for the first time since this started, I wasn't at the center of it. But systems don't fail easily. They adapt. And men like him don't stop at the first answer. They test it, break it, push it until it either holds or reveals what's underneath. And mine didn't hold. The group I used wasn't strong enough to carry the lie completely. They resisted. They panicked. They made mistakes. And mistakes leave traces. Not obvious ones. Not direct. But enough. Enough for someone like him to notice that something didn't align, that the pattern wasn't clean, that the structure had imperfections that shouldn't exist if it were real. That's when he adjusted. Not loudly, not suddenly, just a shift, a recalibration. And the moment that happened, I felt it. The pressure didn't return all at once. It changed direction, like something turning, like something looking at me. The message came the same way as before. No name, no signature, just a place, a time, and the understanding that ignoring it wasn't an option. I went. Of course I did. Because this wasn't about avoiding him anymore. It was about understanding exactly how much he saw. This time, the meeting was different. No neutral ground. No controlled environment. An open space. Empty. Exposed. The kind of place where nothing protects you. Not walls. Not distance. Not illusion. He was already there. Waiting. Not watching the city this time. Watching me. "You adjusted," he said as I approached. Not a question. A statement. "So did you," I replied. We stopped a few steps apart. No movement. No tension. Just clarity. "The group you gave me," he continued, calm as ever. "They believed they were involved." I didn't react. "That's the interesting part," he said. "They didn't know they were lying." I held his gaze. People rarely do. A faint shift in his expression. Not approval. Recognition. "You're not reacting to pressure," he said. "You're shaping it. And you're not following patterns," I replied. "You're testing them." Silence. Not empty. Measured. He stepped closer. "Do you know what that means?" I didn't answer. Because I already did. "It means this isn't about the shipment anymore," he said. I nodded slightly. "I know." Another step. Closer now. Close enough that there was no space left for misdirection. No room for pretending that this was still anything other than what it had become. "You made this personal," he said. I almost smiled. "No," I replied quietly. "I made it intentional." That was the difference. Personal is emotional. Intentional is controlled. And control is what this was always about. He studied me for a moment, longer than before, not searching for answers now, but confirming something he had already decided. "You understand the cost?" he asked. "Yes." "And you're still here?" "Yes." A pause. Then, finally, "Good." That was new. Not threat. Not warning. Acknowledgement. For the first time, we weren't just opponent and target. We were equals in the same structure. Two people who understood the rules well enough to break them. "You can't win this by force," he said. "I'm not trying to," I replied. "And you can't hide forever." "I don't need to." Another silence. Different this time. Final. Because there was nothing left to test. Nothing left to confirm. We both knew. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't circumstance. This was choice. Deliberate. Calculated. Ongoing. You'll make a mistake, he said eventually. So will you. Not first. I held his gaze. We'll see. That was it. No threats. No promises. No need. Because everything that needed to be said already had been. He stepped back first. Not retreating. Resetting. I did the same. Two players leaving the same board, knowing they would return, knowing the next move wouldn't be random, wouldn't be reactive, wouldn't be anything other than exactly what it needed to be. As I walked away, I didn't look back. Didn't need to. I could feel it. That shift. That understanding. He wasn't hunting me anymore. And I wasn't avoiding him. We had both seen each other clearly. Not as obstacles. Not as variables. As intent. And that changed everything. Because now, this wasn't about finding something. It wasn't about proving something. It wasn't about controlling the city. It was something else entirely. A game of minds. And for the first time since it began, I wasn't inside the circle. I was standing across from it. Looking back, this is no longer a game for the city. It has become a battle of two minds. He knows I exist. I know he won't stop. And now every move we make is no accident. It's a choice that can break the other. Only one question remains. Who will make the first mistake? Write your theories in the comments. How do you think this game will unfold? Who will win? And what will the next move be? Don't forget to like the video and subscribe. It's about to get even more intense. The continuation is in the next part.